Okay, cool. So should I start with where we met?
Yeah,
Okay,
this
great.
would be good.
Yeah, so as I said, co-founder, co-director of the New Mexico Contemporary Ensemble with my friend Dalton Harris, and there's an we started a postcard exchange in our very first year. The mission of our ensemble is to play new music by local composers and composers throughout the Americas. So we really try to reflect the community we have here by playing pieces by Latin American and South American composers. And we almost completely do not perform European repertoire, with the exception of folks who were born in South America and now live in Europe, so there's that. But the Postcard Exchange is in honor of James Tenney, and we put out this call, and the only requirement is any artist or creator of any sort can send us a piece, but it has to fit on a postcard. And we want the physical mailed postcard. Yeah. So we put out this call and we got postcards from Josh. And that is how we started working together. We played a number of your postcards and then invited out. We have a composer symposium each year. Of course, COVID affected that, but that usually happens in August. And so Josh came out for our second one, and we collaborated then, and he came back a second time in February of 2020 to record an album that is a series of postcards that he sent in, and here we are now.
Yeah, so what do you think about when you have to write a piece for a postcard? Like, how does that work? I'm sure as an artist or composer, you think of your own way of how to do it, and that's pretty exciting, and especially when it doesn't have to be traditional notation. It could be traditional notation, and I can show you an example of that. But the reason that this sort of spoke to me is because most of my works are written out in, I would say, modular fashion, where they are not necessarily left to right. They are kind of like, how would you say? You could relate it to like George Crumb pieces, where they're cells of musical content. There are obviously other composers that you could name, but that's one that's kind of easy to picture. And so they're interpretive, right? So this was of course, there's nothing there and there. This is an example of a piece I wrote, and I'm sorry if it's small. This is an example of a piece I wrote for solo viola in electronics. And I'm not sure what you think, but when you're looking at it, you might have an idea of how it works. These are cells of musical content that can be played. And I don't have the instructions in here because this is a different version. But the player is instructed to start anywhere they like. So say they want to start here. They would interpret this idea. And so as you can see, this looks like 4 bars, but we have repeats 2 to 3 times. So there's indeterminacy already in there. Next bar, no 2 to 3 times. There is a repeat, right? But does it repeat here? No, maybe it goes back. So there's elements of indeterminacy within this one little cell, right? And after there, they can move to maybe here if they want, do the same thing. This is just a different thing here. This is this chain 1, that's just representing the electronics patch to turn on and off. And as you can see here, there's all kinds of stuff here. So this, in a sense, is a postcard piece right here. You could put this onto a postcard, right? And some sort of musical piece would come out. Maybe it's not the best musical piece, but it's an idea of how you would create some sort of musical piece with a very, very limited limitation or space, yeah? So this is actually the style of kind of how I write a lot of my pieces. They don't all look like this, but this is some sort of way of a modular composition, where you're not starting at measure 1, you're starting at whatever cell the performer desires or wants to do, right? If you want, I could even play a little bit of this. I think that I might even have the video.
Was it both sides of the postcard or just one side?
That's a good question. What would you want to do?
Oh, definitely both.
See?
There
Didn't we have a composer do both sides?
Yes.
What was that
Yes,
piece?
I have it in the
Okay.
thing here.
Okay, sorry to
Let's do-
interrupt.
yeah.
No, this is great.
No, that's great.
This is great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's hear a bit of this.
Yeah, I'll just play a little bit of this. Another thing is that this piece also had video, and the performer was playing into the mics, into the patch, and the patch was being sent to a video that was being controlled by the sound. So it wasn't pre-recorded video. And it was done in a completely black room, completely dark, and we had the projector on the floor and shined it at the performer. So they created almost like a mask, if you will, like a mask. If you're doing like, you're in Adobe and you create a mask and you want to mask something off, it created a mask of their body, and their body was animated by the light. So all you could see was their body kind of playing. Of course, they had to memorize the piece because you can't look at any music. But, okay, so I have the video, but it's not that great. So this one, we did 2 of them. And I'll probably skip around just so that.
Yeah, I think the model's back there. I don't know if the dimmer works. I think they just have to be switched. Oh, it's like this one.
I'll show this little last part. So right now I think he's playing this part. Played like a guitar with various strumming speeds. Yeah. Yeah, so that's just a small example. So as you can see, it's a modular piece in that, and it's different in every time. And that's how these pieces ended up working for postcard pieces, right? So now skip forward. So after some time of composing like this, and this is my, what would you say? I wouldn't say philosophy, but it's like my palette. It's like the paper that I'm composing on, what I'm used to, okay? And so when it came to getting this gig, for instance, at Gearbox as a video game composer, this ended up being the most perfect way because that's how that works. That's how that system works, right? Because when you're playing a game, depending on what happens in the game, music has to turn on and off, right? We turn things on and off. But what if we want the music to change depending on the emotion that's going on, the intensity or the combat, or I mean, it can be so many things because, as you know, the video game, landscape is vast. It can be something as dumb as first-person shooters, to something that's a beautiful story game. RPGs, indie games are incredible too, because they're not bound by right?
Yeah, no.
Are you a gamer? Do you play games?
Oh yeah.
What do you play? What do you play?
Mostly Nintendo stuff, some indie games here and there.
What indie games do you like? Which ones do you
Usually
like?
platformers like Celeste, Hollow Knight.
Okay.
Those are really fun ones.
Have you ever played Inside or
I have yet.
Little Nightmares?
I've heard of Little Nightmares.
Yeah. Little Nightmares is a great example of that because they're using something very interesting in this game. And it's easier to do in these games because believe it or not, there's not a whole lot to them mechanically. But with those limitations, you can do incredible things. So what they're using are these things called volume triggers. Now, when I say volume, I don't mean amplitude. I mean volume like a space. So you set up a box, an invisible box, in a space, and when the player goes through it, it triggers something. Now, with just that alone, you could do so much. You could tell it to trigger this. How fast do you go into it? Okay, if you go through it this fast, let's set up a, what would you call it? A threshold for that type of thing, right? So there's all kinds of things you can do. That's how they created the sound design and the music in that game to be so interactive. Because, as we know, performance in a concert is an interactive experience. It's a more analog version, right? The audience is inside the emotional tapestry of the music and what's going on, and they're in some sort of interactive space, right? Video games are a lot like that, if that makes sense. And so how do you make these things interactive? That's a way to do it, right? So it can be much more complicated than that because, I'm sorry, I talk a lot.
Nope, keep going.
But for instance, that game we just talked about where you have these imaginary boxes that when you accidentally hit them, it's the same thing as a bang like in Max, right? It's the same sort of thing. It's a bang button. It turns something on or off, right? So how do you, what if you go through it and you don't want it to happen again when you go through it again, right? Now there are other things that you have to set up to make that happen, right? What happens if you're in an open world game where the map isn't like this? The map is literally a globe, and it's huge. So now are you able to set up millions and millions and millions of trigger boxes, right? So you have to figure out some sort of generative form of doing that. You know what I mean? Because there's not enough time in the day, literally, for one person or even a team of people to set up trigger boxes, right?
Like individually, no.
Yeah, right? And this is exactly how they create landscapes in games. They don't place every tree. I'm talking about a big game, like a very big open world game.
Daggerfall,
Like
those old
yeah.
games.
Or Star Citizen, have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like Daggerfall, Skyrim definitely.
Yeah, right.
Breath of the Wild.
So they set, and I don't know how to do this exactly because I'm not a coder, but what these designers do is figure out a system similar to this, where there's a system that tells things where to go, and you can literally broad stroke paint trees, thousands of trees, right? And they generatively look like they're placed correctly because of the artful coding that's happening, right? Now you can do that with music as well, all different kinds of things. So, long story short, this style that I seem to develop on my own, I'm not the only one that does things like this, but this is my way of doing it, has led me to that profession, which is amazing because, as all of you know, I'm sure that all of you teach and learn, but as teachers, how scared you can feel for your students to be like, I know how hard it is out there. I know how hard it was for me to get this job. It was very, very difficult, and I feel very fortunate and very lucky. Now I know that this person is going to have to go through that, and that's kind of scary. And it's not just this person, it's all 50 of my students, and all of them work hard, and even that might not be enough, So that brings me to the point of, I think it's important for people not only to learn as much as they can from their teachers and what their teachers know, but to explore their own ways of making art that aren't just copied off of what they're learning from their teacher, right? It's very important, and that's something that I was fortunate enough to discover on my own, but it was also encouraged from other teachers, saying like, yeah, you did a really good job on this composition, but this is just a different version of Orchestral Variations by Copeland, you know? Now, that doesn't mean that I wasn't learning great things as far as how to orchestrate, you know, because that's what I was doing. I wasn't composing. I was learning, I was practicing, I was learning how to orchestrate, right? And so, yeah, if that makes sense. Sorry, I know that's all a bunch of stuff, but that's kind of my message. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Let's see some more of your pieces.
Okay.
And then
Yeah,
we
we
can look
should
at more
show 'em.
postcards. I haven't heard you talk about how you see these, both your style of composition there,
Mm-hmm.
directly connecting the postcards, which of course makes sense to me because I've seen
Yeah.
your pieces,
Mm-hmm.
but then the application into video games
Yeah.
it's very cool that it's going in so many directions.
Yeah, I could show you an example of that. So, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Ableton Live. It is a music production program. Originally, when it was created by Robert Enke, it's kind of interesting because this program was created for DJs. Okay? And so you see all these little blocks here? These are all just blocks of musical content, just like the compositions I was showing you, right? And it's not linear, it's modular. You can turn on, so you know in a sequencer, your tracks move left to right, like this. Now in Ableton, your tracks are up and down, but time doesn't move that way. So time still moves left to right if I want it, but I can play blocks of time from different lines. You see? So let me just stop all the, oh shoot, yeah. So for instance, we play this line. This is an ambient landscape. Transitions, right? But what if we want to do it differently? What if we want to start with just this, and then we want maybe this line to come in? Then maybe we want to start 3 or 4 or 5, but we don't want to do it all at once. So we'll have one part from 4. Maybe when the player hits this thing, we want this one to play, right? And maybe when they start moving faster, we want this one to play, and we want it to speed up. So, do you see how that works modular? It's not linear, it's not dependent on left to right, and things don't have to start and stop.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
That's so interesting, because I always imagined it as kind of like you make your minute-long like loop track, and then you send it out. It sounds like in a project like this, then would you have to deliver like each one of these little cells separate? Okay,
yeah, you deliver stems, and that kind of brings me to my next point, is that are all of you composers? Yeah. So one of my things that I try to, if I try to tell, I don't tell people what to do as an artist. I never ever want to do that. But a skill that I do try to tell composers to do, and it's something that I do see missing a lot, not so much these days, which I'm happy about, but is producing your own music. Like learning how to use a DAW, like it can be Ableton, it can be Pro Tools, it can be Cubase, It can be whatever. It can be
Audacity.
the dumbest, freest thing. And that's, remember when I said in the concert last, I think it's really important for artists to use what they have access to. Don't be held back by, I can't do this because I don't have a $2,000 synthesizer. You know, make it with crap recordings. But you will learn a lot through that. And believe it or not, you might actually make things you like with something, right? I'm sure that you've experienced that.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, I forgot what I was going to say in my point. Yeah, so learning how to use and produce your own music, that goes into what you were talking about, delivering stems, what we call. And the stems are the separate tracks, right? So traditionally, this is what a track would look like for a video game or anything, you know. This would be the whole thing, left to right, you know. We're not going to play it, but you know, left to right.
Oh, so you actually see the two versions?
If you want, yeah.
Oh,
That's what Ableton is cool, because remember when we went back here and we were just doing an improv on play this one, play that one? You can press record, then do that, and then it'll
I see.
line them up here for you
Nice.
exactly how you did it.
Wow, that's cool.
And so after that process, maybe you find something you like and say, okay, this is great, this is great. All right, you know, select all. Well, of course it doesn't do it the way I want it. Select all, and then you would render tracks. Render each track that you want as a loop, because maybe you want one playing by itself, maybe you want them all playing together. But yeah, the traditional way of doing the video game score they would make, say, let's say a 30-second clip of combat music, and it would be maybe 4 or 5 instruments, okay? And the art of that would be, okay, does this work when I add track 2? Does this still work when I add track 3? Does it work when I only have track 3 playing? You know, so you can see that there's a modular sense to it, where you have to understand the totality of it in order for it to work. The beauty
Sounds
of,
fun.
right? Yeah, it is fun, right? But if you're composing it, and I wouldn't say this is the wrong or the right way, but if you're composing a modular landscape in a linear fashion, it's going to be a lot more difficult. It's going to take a lot more time. But if you compose it in a modular way, right? If you approach it in its own nature, because its nature is a modular form, right? This is, yeah.
Yeah, but this I think speaks to Chris's question. I'm still not understanding how you transmit, or what format you transmit the information to the like. I'm assuming you send everything to the coders.
Okay, yeah. So this is just the music production part.
Right.
So after I make all the compositions, I render out all the stems. Then I take the stems and I put them into what's called a middleware program, which could be WWise or FMod. Now this is another program kind of like this that speaks to the game engine. The game engines we use today are mostly Unreal or Unity. Those are game engines. They're not just for games, you know, they're graphic design, but you can use them to make games because they have powerful, the software is very powerful. You can do a lot of things. So this is just the music part. Make the music part, then I take all that stuff, and then I put it into another program, and I say, okay, how do I want to make this transition with itself, and then I get to test it with the game and see if it's working. And so that becomes a little more difficult because you have to set up things called switches. So a switch is like a light switch. When I hit this threshold in the game or this part, it's going to knock that switch, and that switch will maybe turn on this track or that track, right?
So you're actually transmitting the modules.
Yeah. I'm exporting them out into WAV files.
Right.
They're just WAV files at that point.
Right.
So you got to be pretty meticulous about how you design them in here, right? Like for instance, a simple one could be, let's say you have a note that goes for a long time and decays, right? If the decay doesn't go all the way to the end and you render it here, you know, it'll disappear, and then, oh crap, I gotta go back and I gotta make sure that I render out the correct length, stuff like that. Also, like, do things loop correctly? Like if I set up a 4-bar phrase, when it goes back, does it sound like it works, or does it sound, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, like, is there like does it transition smoothly, or is there like a skip?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that's why I say, to the students, like, you should really understand music production in your own way. And it doesn't have to be, you can take classes to learn music production, and that's a very great thing to do. But, learn it in your own way and just know your process. If you know your process, then it'll be a lot easier for you, for sure, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So yeah, it's a lot of work. Music production, you take it out, then you put it into another program, which allows us to talk to the game engine. And then once that's all there, then you got to do all kinds of tuning and mixing. And that's another thing, knowing music production means you know how to mix your music and make sure it speaks well, and kind of be up to date with, modern mixing techniques and just simple things, goes a really long way. And you learn a lot of that on your own, playing with this stuff, So it definitely gives you skills to get a job, if that makes sense. Because I do know a lot of composers that hire folks to do some of these things for them, especially when you get to, let's say, when you become a much more successful composer. I'm just talking about composition, but when you have, say, because right now I'm working on 2 games, and I'm working on like 3 albums of my other stuff, and I'm working on 2 commissions and then our stuff, right?
Yep.
But let's say that I had to do 10 games at once, right? Then I wouldn't be enough time. So I would be the one that just composes this stuff and says, okay, Mary, can you please, mix this, and Johnny, can you please make sure that these are rendered correctly, or, which is even cooler, what I like to do is write a theme and say, okay, now see if you can develop this and make this into your own thing. And this is what people misinterpret about modern film composers. They say, Hans Zimmer doesn't compose any of his pieces anymore. He just writes a line and he gives it to someone and gets all the credit. But really what they're doing is teaching other composers what they learned a long time ago to be able to do their own thing, and teaching them a craft and a skill, really. So, if that rings, yeah. Because I don't know about you, but I do hear a lot in the comp world about, especially when people start to get more successful, they get hated on a lot more, and it's like, well, they worked a lot to get there, and they're very capable. They just don't have enough time, So, yeah. So, do we have anything else?
More pieces.
Yeah, sorry. I'll
No.
stop talking.
No, you're doing good.
Okay.
Yeah, some other examples of what.
Yeah. I'll show them the Lucinari stuff. So this is something completely different. This is something that.
Well, yeah, this is a postcard.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'll even show you. This is the score. This is kind of funny because the first one that James Tenney ever wrote was in respect to, why can't I think, Lamont Young. And so he wrote, with respect to Lamont Young and his swell pieces, I'm writing swell pieces number 1. And so this was my first one, and I was doing the research, and I saw, oh, this is kind of funny. And what's funny is when you're trying to write these pieces, sometimes you come up with the same idea as someone else, because it's hard to think of an idea, And so this was similar to James Tenney's idea. And so I wrote with respect to James Tenney and his swell pieces.
Nice.
Yeah. So this can be from 1 to infinity players. Obviously there are infinity players, but it could be 1 to many players. And this is your score. You choose a note, you play it 1 time. And then after you're done with that, you choose another note and you play it 3 times. And then after that, 5, 7, 11. And if you want, you can go back up. Right? This was, I won't play the whole thing, but I'll give you an idea. changes. It's also interesting when we're playing it, we're kind of reacting off of each other, but we're trying not to at the same time,
Yeah.
you know?
Definitely.
You're playing in it?
I was playing piano in that.
Okay.
Yeah. That one was actually,
That was.
we played the piece 3 times on
Yeah.
3 different occasions, and because I record everything, obviously, I was like, dude, it would be really cool if we put all of them at the same time and see what happens, you know, and that was, so it's pretty rich, but.
Can we go, do you want to go into the flash drive and let's just
Yeah.
scroll through some of the postcards to get a quick overview of what some other people send in, and
Yeah.
then we'll talk briefly about Hallucinari, and
Okay.
then we'll have time, plenty,
Yeah.
like 10 minutes for questions and stuff. Okay, so go ahead if you would and open, let's go Dreyhoff, Fermi's Paradox. That's a good example
Oh, nice.
of,
That's beautiful.
yeah.
Also, before you say anything,
Yeah.
it's actually really hard to find postcards in the store.
Yes.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe.
You'd have to go to other countries to find them more often.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this one, we'll just read through it quickly. It's from Richard Dreyhoff in 2017. For as many as possible players, all players are spatialized and must wear blindfolds and earplugs. Audible breaths at rest. Notes may be played in any octave. For moderation, need not be consistent.
Sounds like a more tyrannical version of 1 to Infinity.
Yes. Yep. So that's an example of using, still using staff on the score. Head back over. Let's go to the Forlano circuit board. Yep, that one.
I like this one.
This is another version.
How do they play this one? They choose sounds for those.
So we did a performance. Actually, why don't there's a audio recording right below that in the
Okay.
folder. You want to play that and I'll talk over it.
Yep.
So we did this last summer up at the Sandbox Music Series in Santa Fe. If you have not heard of that, please look it up. They're doing awesome stuff. We just played there Wednesday night. So for this performance that we're listening to, the ensemble was there. We had a bunch of found objects and allowed the audience to also move up and play instruments on the stage as well that we felt comfortable with them doing. And so we took 5 minutes before the performance of this and actually talked through with the audience like how to interpret it. And so, for example, sometimes when I play this, I choose for the X's to be clapping, or the colors may be a volume, maybe the circles each represent different lengths, whatever. There's a million ways to do it, but there's a specific moment when we were talking to the audience. I was like, okay, what could the X be? And someone chimed in, blink your eyes.
Whoa.
And I was like, yes, you've got it. So we played it with the audience for this recording, and that's this piece. David Forlano's from Santa Fe and runs the Sandbox series, and this is one of his postcards.
That's cool.
So that's an example, and then if you would go to, let's just touch on the Mantinian. So we played,
This one.
actually no, let's do Lily first, really
Okay.
quickly. Yeah, go ahead and click number 1 first. Yeah, exquisite. A little bit Cage, a little bit Tenny. We had performed one of his pieces, 2 of his pieces, and so he sent this postcard as a thank you note. So this is one.
Wow.
If you go to number 2 then,
Yeah.
Lily number 2, this is the actual piece, which is also on the Sandbox series recording on our Bandcamp page, nmcontemporarymusic.bandcamp.
That's pretty cool.
So clearly we have thank you down the middle. So first, re-gift to another a present you never wanted. Now, in any order, make the time to explore a gift you always wanted to put to use. Perform on a gift you didn't want, but can't get rid of, as if it were an instrument. Number 3, give something to the audience. So you're performing through all of these actions and playing all of these items. So for example, somebody had like a dog toy that was really annoying. That was a gift that like you didn't want or something. There were all sorts of things. So this one's really fun. It's a kind of found object, but you can process things, play through pedals, and we had the opportunity to gift something, right? So to the audience. So again, the audience became engaged. Okay, last of these postcards let's look at is the Nantinian. This one is.
Two? Oh yeah, I guess they're both, yeah.
Oh wait, maybe. Oh, those are the wrong. Oh, go in the sandbox one actually. Oh God, there's so many good ones. Rosie, really quick. Click Rosie's on the bottom. This is another one that's just text. Using instruments, gradually build a fire until it is loudly whistling and crackling. When fire is at its peak, the storm drenches everything. It starts with sheets of water and a howling wind, but dwindles to droplets punctuating total calm. So,
Is it literal or?
up to you. Depends on where you're performing it, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, if you go then into the sandbox folder to the left,
Oh, okay, gotcha.
and go ahead and click Mantinian. Yeah, let's start with either one.
Mantinian 4?
So this is the initial score. This is a double-sided postcard.
Yeah.
And what she did is she cut out a piece of paper the size of a postcard and drew on both sides, making her own postcard. And so this is one side of the instructions. This is the typical score part, I guess. But, so you see we have from any pitch you want to the highest pitch to the lowest pitch possible. Noisy sounds with some pitch content, and then noisy sounds without pitch. And so you have to choose 3 different sources. If you go to the other Mantinian page, the back side of it looked like this. And she created, keep flipping 2 more times.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. And then there was a flap attached to it. And so you create a bridge. You create a bridge with this part facing down and the score part facing up. And you put a light underneath it. And the idea is that this is the sounds of the environment coming through into the piece, into the score. And when you can see more of this coming through, you're supposed to balance more with the environment around you and play less. And so it's really, it turned out to be a pretty complex postcard, a lot to keep track of when you're performing it.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk really quick about Hallucinari. One of the things I think it's safe for both of us is engaging with other media, not just music. Obviously, because the video game world, but also he's done other multimedia things. And for me, also visuals are an important part, but I also work with Lauren Coons, whom some of you know, and we do pieces where I'm performing and dancing or moving at the same time. All of this interdisciplinary stuff is, to me, critical for, first of all, bringing in a broader audience. We need more people to be consuming our creations.
And also just learning too, like how much we've learned about technology and things.
Yeah.
You know, that inform our work, you know, I mean.
It all influences things in a beautiful and complex way, in a good way. So one of the, we all landed in the pandemic and we were like, oh, no live performances in person. But Josh was already thinking about virtual performances in various ways long before the pandemic happened. So if you want to.
Yeah, so I was like, why can't we do performances in virtual reality? Because I was watching all these virtual concerts and I was like, okay, you know, first of all, the sound production is pretty bad. And even when you try, it's still kind of, you know, it's not, it's not workshopped and it's just like, whatever, you know. And people were playing traditional pieces and it's like, well, why can't we try to do something in virtual reality? And so I bought a virtual reality headset and started searching for free music apps. And I found a ton. And some of them were great, some of them were bad. But even if you could make noise, you know, as you can see, these scores we were showing before, if you can make noise with something, you can learn how to make some music out of it. And so I found this program called Soundstage, and it's a very interesting virtual environment where you can build setups of instruments. And they give you like a wide array, but you could set up modulators, or excuse me, oscillators, simple, just an oscillator if you want. You can set up keyboards, you can set up controllers to control the keyboard or the oscillators, and that's a long story, very, very short. But we started composing pieces like that, and so made a trio. I think is this your piece?
Yeah.
So really quick, that's the score. Maybe form PR. Each player chooses a pitch set, and then this is the time.
Yeah, and we decided to break the time.
Yeah.
But
And she was telling us minute 30, minute 1, minute 1:30. Let's skip a little bit. It's pretty wild.
to our knowledge, we're the first chamber music ensemble to play in virtual reality.
Yeah,
That is so cool.
right.
And then, go ahead,
Yeah.
multi-brush.
Yeah, and then we found a painting program where you can paint in 3D. This is like one of the first things they actually did once the Oculus One came out about, I think it was maybe 5 to 10 years ago. But you had to be tethered to a PC. And it's a painting program that you can paint in 3D. And so we're like, dude, let's make graphic scores in 3D, right? And so because we can all exist in the same space virtually, we're all in there together, even if Dalton is in Germany, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask about that. So that was happening live in the moment where multiple people were
Yeah.
participating in, yeah.
Yeah,
So we currently we are sending 3 streams to a live stream typically to record it and then putting them together for YouTube. But
yeah,
an audience attending live will be watching 3 streams simultaneously that are each of us, but we're living in the same space. So
Yeah.
at some point, other people will be able to join us in that space when the technology is more.
I was gonna say, have you ever had an audience join you in the VR space?
we will in the future. And
Yeah.
they theoretically can now because you can join these as a party in the Oculus 2, but it requires you to have one. And so until this technology becomes more, what would you call it, accessible, accessible, like, and it will, because we didn't have cell phones 30 years ago or 40 years ago. Maybe we did. I'm getting older, but everyone and their mother has a cell phone, and we're getting to this time in technology where everyone will have access to these sorts of things. So our hope is to try to be the innovators or the mavericks for this sort of thing. Because how cool would it be to be able to go to a chamber concert virtually? I mean, it's not like the future as in we're always going to do that. It's just a new medium, And so, really quick, this was Dalton's score. He built a bunch of objects and then he covered them up and then he reveals them and we try to play them.
So basically, he's the conductor,
Yeah.
but through manipulating the score.
Yeah, so you can see on the right where he's moving his hand around.
Yeah, all 3 of us built our own scores, and they all turned out totally different conceptually.
Yeah.
Like, Josh's is a complex structure, sculptural space.
Yeah, like
Here.
that's mine.
And are you all wearing headsets and having the surround experience?
Yeah.
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 So this is Josh's, and then mine is more like a choose your own adventure. There's paths to follow, and you get into other spaces, and can play those too. Yeah.
So you can see they're vastly different. I mean, but the way we're doing this is we're casting live to a computer, then to cast it out on the internet, which is how we did it, because we're doing these concerts live. But I had my own setup, Ableton Live with an interface and instruments going in, and that casting to, so you're able to hear good produced sound through an interface in your headset, and it's not like watching a virtual concert,
Everything's like compressed to death.
Right, yeah, so it's just, and it's obviously a work in progress, but yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
practical
Yeah,
stupid question?
We're,
Yeah, let's go to the
How
questions for
much
sure.
are those headsets?
You
Like
can buy one.
the whole thing?
You can get one for $300. It's actually quite accessible, more than it used to be.
And is that's not with any programming? The programming all has to come from an external source of some kind?
Yeah, but these are free. This is free software. They're like free apps.
Mhm.
Yeah. So our hope is to work with other composers to have them
Yeah.
build scores and replay them and do things like that. You know,
Mhm.
getting the audience and more important, like composers engaged and trying new things. You know. But
Yeah.
we're over time. But if you have any questions,
Yeah, if
I
if
think
you
it's
need to
11
run, we won't be offended,
it's
but if you want to
11:50.
hang and ask questions,
Yeah.
cool. Everybody's welcome to submit postcards, and if this kind of space is really interesting to you and you have an Oculus, also be in touch with us. Yeah, questions?
I had a couple about Clouded, if that's okay.
Sure.
I was wondering, one, about how you built those electronics. Is that another thing that you did in Ableton?
Yep.
Oh, okay. It sounded maxy to me, so that's why I
Yeah,
was
I
wondering.
mean they're just simple patches in Ableton.
Yeah.
I tend not to use very complex electronic processing.
Right.
I like to use like the simple ones and make interesting chains out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I was going to ask about the arrows on the on the accidentals in the score of that piece. I was like,
Yeah.
do you use microtones very often?
I do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Could you
Yep.
give me just a
Yep.
brief
Yeah.
description of how they work in that
I'll
piece?
show you really quick. Let's see here. No. Okay, bro.
You do you.
Sorry, I would do that, but it'll probably ask me 1,000 times, so
Right.
I'm not going to do that. And then, of course, it's the only one that's not up. Let me just, it was in,
It should be in that,
it's right here.
okay.
Is it this one? No, it's this one. Yeah. Oh, cool, this is the one that has the, yeah. So I'll just show you real quick. Let's see, this one, yeah. So, okay, so for instance, if you don't read this clef, this is a note C right here. This is the 7th. Now the natural 7,
Got you. Okay.
the natural 7 in the harmonic series is 31 cents flat in the harmonic series. So that's why I write that, so that if you know it's the 7th, it means it's a little bit flat. You see how it's a flat?
That's where okay. I didn't know if the -31s were cents or not,
Right.
but that totally makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And so for instance here, this one is the minor 6th, but I'm still using, or excuse me, I'm stupid. Major 7th is
Right.
12 cents flat.
Mhm.
And here, this is the tritone. It's actually really a.
Is that is it 11 or is
Yeah.
that okay?
Yeah, that's the 11. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a couple of real ways to do this to write actual accidentals for this.
But people don't know them, so I totally understand why.
Yeah.
That's
That-
pretty clever, huh?
Yeah, no, I like that.
I always write the sense.
Mhm.
You know, Parch, if you know Harry Parch, would always write them as the actual,
The
ratio.
ratios, right?
which can be confusing, but if you're like totally know how that works, it totally makes sense. Like you see 3-2, that means you're playing the perfect fifth
Mhm.
in that series, you know. But when it starts getting to things like, 11 to 8 or, 17 to 13, like things like that, you start being like,
Yeah.
Yeah, you're really limiting yourself, like for who can
So-
play your music if you're writing. it
right,
like that,
yeah.
totally.
So I try to put everything up there so that they can be like, oh, okay, it's just,
A little bit flat.
yeah.
A smidge flat, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I had a bit of a question regarding
Sure.
the concept for the postcard pieces. Have you ever tried using putting those postcard pieces together in some way, like having a rally where multiple postcards come in and you try to string each of them together, each one is composed by a different composer, but you're stringing them together in a larger project.
We play multiple on a concert, but we don't typically overlap them. we did a show with you last February where we put several of your pieces very directly back to back
Yeah.
and connected them. But also you submitted a series of postcards,
Yeah.
Places of Transformation, which we recorded
Yeah.
in February. That's in the drive too.
It's also right here.
Cool. Yeah,
These are all, this was,
these were all
14.
small modules.
these are very melodic tonal pieces, so,
You want to pull up one of those?
yeah. This is number 1, I believe.
It'll be the one that doesn't have a number.
Yeah, this is just, oh, I can't see it. Disappeared. Yeah. This is just number 1. So however many players are starting wherever they want in that measure, and then continuing and repeating it at their own rate. In any register. This one I really like a lot. I'll just show you that real quick. I think it's this one. No, it's this one. No, it's this one.
You'll find it eventually.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a series that he sent in 5 postcards that became a full-length album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can send in as many as you want.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And you're obligated to play each and every one, right? That's the
No.
Just kidding.
We have gotten some duds.
Totally.
But there are many that this has turned out to be an incredible way for us as an ensemble to meet composers that we otherwise might not find digging around the internet. You know, Josh being one of them. You know, so
How did you send the call out?
Yeah.
you know there are a bunch of
I found it on Composer's site.
Oh, yeah, okay.
If you don't know that site, that's a great site. Yeah.
cool. Yeah, we just sent it to a number of music departments and basically we're like, hey, if this is interesting, please tell your students and then basically we looked for other call for scores and then figured out how to get our there. Yeah, so. We play, so once again, we're playing tonight at Juno 6:30. We'll do pieces by each of us. And then, if you know people in Flagstaff, we're playing their Interference series on Sunday. If you don't follow their stuff, you probably want to. Interference series. They do, I think it's 3 or more shows a month usually. Really incredible stuff. I haven't been over there to see it yet, but we're playing there on Sunday. And then the Contemporary Ensemble, you can find us online at nmcontemporaryensemble.org. We'll have a virtual performance that's different than the Illusionari stuff in May, and then we'll have Illusionari shows, and then our symposium is in August, and we're having Scott McClay this year, who was just here, as I'm sure you know. And other links, joshuacarro.com,
Yeah.
clarabyom.com, I do a whole bunch of things. Any other questions?
Yeah. Sorry for keeping you over time, but
Yeah.
appreciate.
No, it's interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very enjoyable. I'm sorry more people didn't show today.
That's
Hey,
okay.
sorry, we've been finding our video game composers here for so long.
What?
I'm saying they will be sorry,
Oh,
because we've been
yeah,
trying
absolutely.
to get a video
There you
game
go.
composer to get, come
Right,
give us a
yeah.
presentation for a really long time.
Well, maybe they